Hi, David. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. David, listen, tell us a bit about yourself, your ministry, your family. Just,
Yeah. I was born and raised Medicine Hat, Alberta, on the Bald Prairies of Alberta, and lived there for most of my life. And then I was in grade 12, joined the military, so lived in Wainwright for a little while. And then after that, moved up to Cold Lake with my parents, decided to freeload off them for a little while until I went to college and went to Briarcrest Bible College in Cairnport, Saskatchewan. And yeah, so kind of lived all over the place a little bit. Did an internship here in Montreal in '06, and then came back, finished my fourth year, got married, lived in Wainwright for 5 years. And so married to Jeannie, and we've been married for 13 years. We have two kids, Annabelle, who's 11, turning 12, and Levi, who just turned 8 years old. So yeah, it's just wild because he was born here in Montreal.
listen, when you talk about Wainwright, that brings back memories because I'm from the province of Quebec. I'm born and raised in Sherbrooke. And five of us guys, we decided to go out west and find different jobs. This was after high school. And I ended up working for a farmer who lived in a little town in Neilburg, Saskatchewan, which is just near Marsden. And Wainwright is not too far from there on over just on the border area.
Yeah.
And my first Pentecostal church I ever went to was in Lloydminster.
Okay.
I'm born and raised a Roman Catholic. Never, you go to church, you kneel, and so forth. And I went to a new evangelical free church in the morning with the farmer I worked for. And believe it or not, I went to church twice that day. He said, let's go to my church in Lloydminster, and Pentecostal. I've never been in a Pentecostal church. Banjos, guitars, all sorts of stuff going on. Never been a part of that before. And my first experience was up in that area. So when you say Wainwright, it really brings back some ministries.
Now,
So
was it on the Alberta side or the Saskatchewan side?
that's a good question. I can't remember. It must have been the Saskatchewan. Actually, they were between pastors. This is
Okay.
a few years ago. This was, let's see, back in 19, believe it or not, back in 1971. That's 50 years ago. And so I won't tell you how old I was at the time because that would date me, but you can imagine how old that was. And that was my first experience. The farmer I worked for was Pentecostal farm. Anyway, you just brought back all that to mind. Now, you said you were in Wainwright for 5 years. Were you in a church or were you doing ministry there or what?
Yeah, so I was reserves, military reserves and I was working. We initially moved there to do a full-time contract because we had just gotten married, so was looking to have some employment. So had signed a 3-year contract with the military to work in Wainwright. And while we were there in our contract, the church we were attending. Actually, this is a good point because before we moved to Wainwright, we emailed all of the churches and only one church emailed us back, which was the Wainwright Pentecostal Assembly. And so we were like, all right, let's go check it out. And we stayed there. And during that time, their youth pastor accepted a job in another town, and so we moved into the youth pastor role, and we youth pastored there for 3 years. So worked for the military 2 years, and then worked for youth pastoring for 3. So
Oh, great. So listen, I got to ask you a question here. So why Quebec? How'd you end up in Quebec? Why ministry in Quebec?
yeah, it's a really cool. I feel like it's a really cool redemptive story because when you're in Alberta and you're kind of stuck in your world a little bit and you don't have a lot of experiences, especially in Medicine Hat, Alberta, you don't have a lot of multicultural experiences, at least not in the 80s. Maybe I'm dating myself now, but I knew one Quebecer family, no, two, and we knew two of them. And so there is just a lot of misunderstanding. And so it just really wasn't a place that I wanted to necessarily go. And then fast forward a few years, I'm at Briarcrest College and I'm sitting in a chapel meeting. and two Briarcrest alumni, were talking about their ministry work here in Montreal. And there are two things that I knew for sure. I knew that I wanted to work with youth and young adults, and I wanted to be in a big urban center. And so they talked about being downtown, and then they quoted two statistics that sort of gripped me. One was the often quoted 0.5% evangelical Christian, which was shocking to me. But then the other one was 200 to 250,000 post-secondary education students located in the greater Montreal area. And I just kind of like, 250,000? I couldn't even comprehend that kind of number. I'm like,
How big is Medicine Hat? How big is Medicine Hat?
50,000, right? So it's like, it's like 5 times bigger than that just with students. So I was like, well, if that's the area that you feel called to work, you'd be dumb not to throw yourself right in the middle of that. And the fact that people don't know Jesus is another thing that is important. So then I had a lot of questions, and I walked up to them and I said, hey, would you like to take on an intern? And they're like, okay. I wasn't sure about French and that kind of stuff. Didn't take French in school, took German instead. I have no German words in my head anymore. And downtown Montreal, it's not too bad to be Anglophone. You can pretty much get by for most places with a lot of ease. And so I came here to work for a year, to intern for a year. And I met my wife, whose mother was originally from Montreal, and she attended CLA in BC. And Claude Hood came and spoke at her church in the 90s and just stirred a heart for Quebec in my wife. And so she kind of engineered her whole ministry path towards coming to Quebec. So for me, it was like I had to resolve, did God call me to Quebec? And it was a moment where I was back in Alberta. I was at a pastor's conference in Calgary, and I was going home to Cold Lake to hang out with my parents for Thanksgiving. And it just struck me that it wasn't home anymore, that it wasn't my final destination place. And I was like, Montreal and Quebec has become far more my home than Alberta feels at this point. So even though we came back after we got married and lived in Alberta for 5 years, and when we got hired at the church, we're just like, if an opportunity comes up for us to move back to Quebec, that we want to take it. We want to go there.
So what year did you and your wife move back to Quebec?
2013.
2013.
Yeah.
And what ministries have you been involved in when you came back? What were you doing in ministry there?
Largely for sake of the ease of the conversation, working with students, primarily at the campus of McGill. And so we've started we brought a support network to the campus of McGill called Red Frog Support Network. And we've been primarily creating support for the campus of McGill. And how we do that, we provide support. We were looking at statistics, we were looking at demographics, we were looking at like, Lord, how can we serve the campus best? And a number of things happened in campus ministry across Canada, but largely the Spirit of God led us to work through harm reduction. And harm reduction means basically, for all intents and purposes, of being a sober best friend in the party scene. And so kind of identified a lot of shocking statistics with regards to alcohol-related injuries, sexual assault statistics that were very disturbing. And we realized that God was calling us and leading us into that. And so he opened up the doors with the student union for us to be able to come in and help to change some of the party culture that existed on the campus. And during that time of research, come to find out that a lot of the top party schools in Canada, according to Maclean's magazines, are actually located here in Quebec. McGill being one of them, Bishop's University being another, Concordia, UDM, some CEGEPs, they kind of fall in some of the top party schools in Canada. So we realized that there was a big need here to help address it. And so God just kind of led us into this initiative, and it's been quite a ride ever since. And yeah, so we've largely been doing that. I also run a campus group with the Christian Medical and Dental Association as well.
Yeah.
And so we've been really ministering to medical students. It's difficult for them to integrate into the life of a church because their schedules are all over the place. And so especially as they move into their second, third, fourth year, they're doing a lot of shift work. And so we as a network, kind of knowing the craziness of their schedule, are kind of able to come alongside and provide discipleship support to them as they're going through and processing their medical education and those kinds of things, where there's, I mean, even on the English side of the world, there's very little gospel presence in it, and it's difficult to live out your faith within that kind of a community. So yeah, so I've been very privileged to be able to walk with some medical students through that.
Well, that sounds really good. It's great, David. So, you know, ministry in Quebec, like I know you're involved in the university post-secondary work. How is ministry in Quebec different, we'll say, than in another part of Canada? Let's just use where you're from. Do you see differences? Do you see how you relate to people? You know.
Yeah. So on the campus side, there's a big difference, and so this is like so I'll say one of the things about like my future passion and excitement. The Southern Baptists did this big study where they wanted to see where their resources were being directed. And so they looked at campuses in North America, and they worked to identify churches and ministries on campuses, who's there, who's not. And they basically found that the top 50 schools or campuses with the least accessibility to the gospel, meaning that there's very little resources for students to be able to run into someone who even knows what the gospel is. The top 50 are in Canada, and most of those campuses are in Quebec. So we're talking CEGEPs and those kinds of things. So there's already in Quebec culture, there's a difficulty of the accessibility to the gospel, but on campuses, it's even more difficult. So I would say like that's one of the big difficulties that we run into. So McGill is a little bit easier because it's more of an international student population. There's more of an expectation of having Christian groups and Christian student groups. So there's like, it's a little bit more expected at McGill. And so it's very easy to stay there. But when you move to a campus like University de Montreal, or you move to UQAM, all of a sudden that changes everything, because they're like, we have a Christian group, so we're good. So yeah, but you also have 50 to 60,000 students attending there. One Christian group isn't exactly representative of the variety of Christians that you have on campus. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. You have that one group, and it's like, yeah, but they're crazy. Doesn't matter. You can do stuff with them. So
that part.
So it's like you're almost like each campus is almost like sort of a closed country, so to speak, and especially the CEGEP. The CEGEPs is a whole nother beast, because it's like part, for those who don't know, it's like part high school and part university.
I was going to say, you better explain what CEGEP is. We know what it is.
And I personally, I'm thrilled that my kids get to experience CEGEP. I think it's a wonderful system. Low cost, easy way to explore programs that you're interested in, but they're even more difficult to get on than the university campus. They're much more closed and much more protective of who's allowed access to the campus or not. And also some others that I've other campus ministry people that I've talked to, they also say that one of the big difference too in like French campus ministry is that, like, you'll know a McGill student because they'll wear their sweater, McGill, woohoo, rah rah McGill. They'll wear their colors, and there's an esprit de corps, there's like that kind of a thing. I have Briarcrest sweaters in my closet. Like, you wear the branding, but it seems that on French campuses that esprit de corps just isn't quite the same. It's like I do my university, and that's it. So that creates some challenges in having to really think outside the box of how we do campus ministry and stuff. So um, I'd say that's one thing. Another thing is it seems like um, relational ministry and like long time relationship building, you just have to kind of be in for the long haul, to walk with someone towards even being able to cross cross the threshold to be able to begin speaking about religious matters and about faith matters. Whereas I think in the English world, we expect Christians to talk about their faith. We expect that, but you're talking about a culture that has experienced some deep wounds, and very mistrustful. I mean, we even saw that in the current debate. They just
Yeah.
like asked the question, and all of a sudden it galvanized voters to vote for the bloc. So there is this sort of like long-term relationship building that becomes the effective ministry, and is just like got to be prepared for probably really small small numbers in terms of baptisms and confessions of faith within a Quebec culture. And I think even in student ministry on the English side, you have that as well. But on the French student ministry, it's even more pronounced.
So, going along with that, you talk about, the importance of relationship building. So when you come to Quebec, like I know there's, books that try to explain the particularity of, Quebec. And I know when Canadians hear that Quebec is a nation, they say, well, what do you mean you're a nation? Canada is a nation, I mean, there's a difference a bit in the idea of nations governmentally or nation by identity. And I'm not talking about, the governmental side of it. We know that Quebec is a province within the country, within the Canadian nation, but there's this nationalistic thing in the province of Quebec, which you don't have anywhere else in Canada. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not, Canadian. For some, they don't, we know the controversy that goes on, but there's this particular nationalism that you find here, and which reflects the culture of the people, the joie de vivre they always talk about. So that whole area, David, as you come and minister in Quebec, that whole cultural thing, do you feel it? Do you find that? Do you like it? Do you think it's okay, or how do you?
Oh man, it's kind of funny because I had a cousin who moved from Alberta to BC, and one time he posted the status saying, "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm too liberal for my conservative friends, and I'm too conservative for my liberal friends." And I burst out laughing because I'm like, "That's how I feel." So in a lot of senses, being here, there's a lot to that I understanding more of the history and talking to people who've been through some of that has really changed my perspective about that. I love the joie de vivre. I love the like terrasse. I love the whole like atmosphere. It's enjoyable. It's relational. It's a great way to get to know people. And so in a lot of senses, I find myself slowly becoming more Quebecified.
Like you said before, like you maybe before it was a calling, you felt that you should be in Quebec and not in Cold Lake, Alberta, and so it grows on you, that's for sure. So David, you're, we talk about the needs in Quebec and so forth. You work in the campuses, you work with Mission Canada. Maybe you want to talk a bit about the actual work with Mission Canada that you do, but how could someone come and help in Quebec? What could they do? How can they help you? How can they come and help in ministry in the province of Quebec?
Yeah, the the harvest field is big. And I think like one of the things that is difficult to find is like hmm, I can think of what I want to say, but I don't know if I yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of there's so many areas. It's kind of like you could just take a dart and just sort of throw it and figure it out. And
I guess there's just so
especially,
much, that can be done. Like I tell people, Quebec is very open to creative things, creative ways of doing things too, and arts and culture. You can reach
yeah.
people through that very,
And I think like I think for one thing, it's like I'm willing to let sort of if you're coming to Quebec, there's a couple of things. One is French language is really important.
yeah.
So it's like no matter what, if you do speak French, if that's like your first language, or you're like fully bilingual, it's like, why aren't you in Quebec? Because there's work to be done here, and we need your help. And so that's one thing. Then another thing I think is just like allowing the sort of like the fight of the sort of some political things or whatever, let that die and just like be willing to come and serve however that is. And that's something that I've had to learn as a Westerner. There's some things that sort of rankle at me, but it's just like, who am I called to and what has the Lord called me to? And what am I willing to just like let go and place it in the hands of Jesus? So I think like those are a couple of things. Um, Prayer and financial support. Those are big areas because it would be wonderful to have. I know even in the church planting world, it's very difficult for church plants to become self-sustaining. It's not impossible, but it's just a very long road to become that way. And so the same thing, it's even in campus ministry. It's like it'd be great if we could have alumni with students who turn around and like sow into the ministry and sort of become sort of self-sustaining, but in some ways it's difficult to do that. So there's financial support that can be had. Also, like man, send missions teams to come because there's a lot that can be taught here in exegeting a culture and learning how to minister in a culture that's not your own, that will only help and aid your church and your neighborhood later and can help to open up. So we have a missions team that came up from Texas, no English or no French at all, just a very like Southern drawl kind of thing. And 2 years ago, we got to do Jeux de Génie, which means engineering games. And when I first showed up there, it dawned on me really quickly that 90%, 95% of the students there were all Francophone. And I'm like, oh man, I only have like Texan volunteers. How's this gonna go? So I'm like trying to get all my Quebecer like people to come. But what was amazing was as we began to serve them, as we began to show love, they were just like, this is incredible. Like the language barrier wasn't as much of an issue. And they were happy to see people actually giving and showing love and serving with like a beautiful heart. So there are opportunities for churches to be even able to send like young adults team. And I would love to talk to you about that. We have plenty of space and time to do that. So I think we have a couple of missions things that happen with SOAR. SOAR is a great program for your church to get involved with, to come and sort of see young adult ministry in Quebec and Quebec culture and working with local churches and things like that. So I think there's a couple different ways for churches to do that. But we have so many CEGEPs. I mean, we're talking like almost 50 campuses that have next to no accessibility to the gospel or very, very little accessibility. And it's just like, let's go.
David, I'm going to put up on the end of this video, some of your details, but if somebody wants to contact you, can they do that? And
Yep.
how would they contact you? Just send you an email or?
Yep. that's a great way to do it. David.Ritz@poc.org.
Yeah. So you're what we call a Missions Canada worker, and
Yeah.
you know, I can just say that you need support too, because you're like a global worker, and you this is what you do. This is what you feel your calling is in life, and so if anybody is wanting to reach either myself or David and to know more about the ministry in downtown Montreal campuses, just please contact us. Well, David, listen, I don't know if there's any last words you might have. If nothing on your heart, that's fine. We're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you so much for the time you've given. Any last words, thoughts, or?
Yeah, just like God completely transformed my heart from being someone who is bitter and upset, frustrated. I remember the 95 referendum and being frustrated with that. And the Lord has completely changed and shifted my heart to see Quebec the way that he sees it. And it's his heart. And so that's I would pray the same for others. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks, David. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you soon, because we hang out too sometimes.
Yes.
Promise you that coffee. I better go and deliver.
For
Okay,
sure.
bless you, my friend.
Thank you.